Are you thinking about starting a podcast but don't know where to begin? The truth is, you don't need another overwhelming, expensive course. You need bite sized, on the go lessons that fit into your life. That's why I created Podcubator Podcast Academy, a private podcast course that teaches you how to podcast while you're living your life. Listen while you drive, cook, or walk, and each short lesson gives you the clarity and confidence to finally press record. So subscribe today and start learning podcasting the easy way with Podcubator Podcast Academy private podcast course. Use the link below and subscribe today and enjoy 30 days free while you start your podcasting journey. So here's a question every aspiring podcaster asks. How do you turn your idea into a powerful podcast that people actually listen to without getting stuck, overwhelmed, or giving up before episode 7? That's what this podcast is all about. I'm J. Rosemary Francis, and this is Tools of the Podcast Trade, where we unravel the mystery so you can get clarity on your podcasting journey. Today, we're diving into an important topic to podcasters: legal protection for your show. We're talking guest release, copyright traps, defamation landmines, and how to make sure your podcast doesn't accidentally land in legal hot water. Because your voice is your brand and your brand deserves protection. But first, let me just offer this disclaimer. I'm not an attorney and I'm not a legal professional. This episode is for information only. Please seek the help and guidance of an experienced professional who could help you navigate the legal landmines of podcasting. So, with that said, let's dive in. Number 1, the shifting sands of podcast law. Let's start with what's changing in the podcast world and why 2025 looks very different from just a few years ago. Podcasting used to feel like the Wild West, creative freedom everywhere, few rules, and even fewer lawsuits. But that's changing fast. In 2024, there was a sharp rise in podcast related lawsuits. From copyright disputes to defamation claims, some podcasters even face takedowns and demonetization because they use AI generated content that look or sounded too much like real people. And in 2025, the legal landscape is even trickier. We now have deep fakes, AI voice cloning, and synthetic guests making appearances without clear disclosures. One high-profile case involved a major media network being sued because their AI quote-unquote guests used a real person's likeness without consent. The takeaway is whether you're a solo or part of a network, you are responsible for every piece of content you publish. That's why guest releases, those boring looking legal forms we tend to skip, are absolutely critical. They're your insurance policy that says, hey, my guest gave me permission to record, edit, and distribute this conversation. Without it, you could be one disagreement away from a takedown notice, or worse, a lawsuit. I encourage you to revisit episode 12 of this podcast, where I have a discussion with Eric Farber, who is an attorney, a copyright attorney, and that episode will give you some solid background on what to expect and what to do to prepare your podcast properly. Copyright catastrophes and how to dodge them. Now let's talk about another big trap, copyright. You might be thinking, I'm a small creator. Who's going to come after me? Well, here's the thing. In the eyes of the law, copyright doesn't care if you have 10 downloads or 10 million. Fair use is a beautiful concept, but it's also one of the most misunderstood. So let's clear this up. Quoting a few seconds of a song without permission is not automatically fair use. Using someone's YouTube clip to make a reaction episode might count as transformative, but it's still risky without credit or permission. And if you're willing, and if you're pulling sound bites from guests or creators who later retract consent, that can open another can of worms. So, what can you do? You can license your music, use royalty-free tracks, or subscribe to platforms like Epidemic Sound, Soundstrip, or Audio Jungle. Number two, document permissions. If a guest shares a personal recording, get it in writing that you can use it. And number three, avoid quote unquote borrowed sound effects or jingles unless you know where they came from. Let me give you a real world example. A few years ago, a podcaster was hit with a $10,000 penalty for using 10 seconds of a popular song as their intro without permission. 10 seconds. And another show had to remove dozens of episodes because a co host left and revoked users' rights. Imagine losing years of content overnight. The moral of the story is it's cheaper and smarter to protect your work than to repair it. Number three, defamation, privacy, and podcaster perils. Now let's wade into some murky waters. Defamation and privacy. When we share opinions, critique businesses or individuals, or discuss real people, we walk a fine line. Defamation means saying something false that harms someone's reputation. The tricky part, intent doesn't always matter. Even if you didn't mean to cause harm, you can still be held liable if your words cause damage. In 2024, several podcasters faced lawsuits for commentary that crossed into character assassination. One even lost sponsorship deals because of a single unverified claim made on air. So, a few golden rules here: stick to facts, verify everything before you hit publish, label opinions as opinions. It helps show your intent is not malicious. And third, add disclaimers. Simple lines like this content is for informational purposes only can go a long way. And privacy matters too. If you're discussing sensitive topics, especially involving guests, make sure you have their explicit consent to share certain details. And with so much personal information moving around online, be mindful of what you store. Don't keep unnecessary guest files or email addresses longer than you need to. Also, consider content warnings for episodes that discuss trauma, violence, or sensitive themes. It's not just good practice. In some regions, it's a compliance agreement. It's a compliance requirement under digital content laws. Number four, contracts, collaborations, and compliance. All right, let's talk about paperwork because contracts aren't just for lawyers. They're for smart podcasters. Here are the essential agreements you need to protect your brand. Number one, a guest release form grants you the right to record, edit, and publish your guest interview. It should also cover commercial use if you plan to monetize. Co-host agreements outline who owns the show name, who controls the feed, and how profits or losses are shared. Advertiser agreement sets clear expectation with sponsors, deliverables, timelines, and content approval, stuff like that. And don't forget, if your podcast audience or guests are global, you're now under international law. For instance, the GDPR in Europe and CCPA in California both affect how you collect and store personal data. even if you just ask for emails in a newsletter sign up. Then there's user-generated content. If you feature listeners' story or comments, clarify that by submitting them, the listener grants you permission to use and edit their content. Remember, clarity now saves a lot of conflict later. And here's a pro tip. Create a legal section on your website. You do have a website, right? Include your privacy policy terms of service and a contact form for inquiries. It signals professionalism and transparency. And number 5, your 2025 podcast legal action plan. Let's wrap up with some actionable steps. Here are 3 affordable tools and services worth looking into. LegalZoom or Rocket Lawyer for affordable basic contracts and LLC setup. You can also check out the document, The Podcast Legal Guide by the Podcast Academy. And contract management tools like Notion templates or Google Drive e-signature add-ons are great for tracking guest release. Now, if you have a website like Podpage has guest releases integrated into their guest intake form. And that's a tip for you if you need a podcast website. Now let's talk strategy. Building a proactive legal framework means doing quarterly audits of your show's asset, the artwork, the music, the licenses, contracts. So I'm going to give you a tip. So when I started Tools of the Podcast Trade, I had this bright idea that tools, well, it connotates hammer and anvil and spanners and stuff like that. So I designed my cover art with all those things, right? Tools of the podcast trade. Without anyone saying anything to me, I realized that that could cause some confusion and I did not want that. And so I changed my cover art to feature myself. At first, it was a podcast mic because that's a podcasting tool. And then I switched it up to use my image instead, speaking into a mic. So that's something that you may want to look at, your artwork, your music license, your contracts, and have clear policies, especially around if you have sponsorships or affiliate disclosures. Those are things that you have to do and that the FTC requires you to do. If you're using affiliates in links, is to disclose that. And then, as I mentioned before, what to do if you have user generated content. Creating an incident response plan. If a legal issue arises, keep calm, consult an attorney, and document everything. And finally, the single most important action you can take today is to start using a guest release form for every interview. I have a free template which you can use as guidance for creating your own guest release form. Even if it's your best friend or your mom, it's not about mistrust. It's about stewardship of your creative work. Your podcast is more than content, it's your legacy. Protect it like you would any valuable assets. So, to recap, protecting your podcast legally isn't about fear, it's about your freedom to create, freedom to speak boldly and create confidently, a freedom to grow without worrying that one mistake will undo your hard work. If today's episode gives you that little nudge to tighten your legal foundation, then your future self and your brand will thank you. I'm J. Rosemary Francis. Thanks for listening. If you found this episode helpful, share it with fellow podcasters and don't forget to subscribe for more tips to help you create, grow, and protect your podcast. Don't forget my free download for my guest release template and a disclaimer template as well, added as a bonus. Free to you to download today to help you on your journey to protecting your podcast. Until next time, go create something amazing and make sure it's protected. More than 80% of podcasters quit before episode 10. Don't be one of them. The Podcubator Podcast Academy gives you bite-sized lessons to start and grow your show fast, conveniently delivered via a private podcast. Whether you're starting from scratch or just need a walkthrough on one or two strategies, from deciding on your ideal listener to getting your show on Apple Podcasts or something else, the Podcubator Podcast Academy will help you bridge the 2 millimeter gap between where you are now and where you want to be. So don't get stuck. Press play and bring your podcasting dreams to reality.